Today we're going to show you a few ways you can improve catching fish with a Ned rig. So Ned rigs seem pretty simple, right? They're just a jig head, a small soft plastic, and they seem pretty simple to understand, but there are times where it seems like the Ned rig isn't getting the job done. You feel like conditions are perfect, you're like, I'm gonna throw a Ned rig today, but it's not producing fish like it should. So if you've ever been in that situation before, let's talk about how you can change it up and catch more fish. Starting with the soft plastic that you're fishing on your Ned rig. If you guys see this right here, this is like the stereotypical Ned rig bait, right? This is the staple. It looks like a mini stick bait, a tiny little 𝗙𝗹𝗹𝗶. This seems to be the go-to when it comes to fishing a Ned rig. A lot of guys will pick this up. If it's not working, they just assume that the Ned rig isn't working. The number one thing that I always pay attention to when it comes to fishing a Ned rig is to immediately think about the forage I'm trying to imitate, or matching the hatch. So although the worm works great, sometimes that's not exactly what the bass want. Oftentimes there's lakes that the bass are primarily feeding on shiners, they're feeding on shad. Or maybe you're fishing along a river or a creek mouth where you have a really rocky bottom and those bass are primarily eating crayfish. Try picking up something that imitates crayfish, like this guy right here, or even something like this, the 𝗙𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗹. Don't just stay glued to the stick bait Ned rig. Although it's a classic and it works great, it's not always gonna get you the bite that you want. So now that you guys have picked out your soft plastic, let's talk about the hook that you're gonna pair it with. Now, there's so many different Ned rig hooks on the market now. You guys can get mushroom head hooks. You guys can get, a Ned rig hook with a weed guard. You can even get them with a small EWG on it so that you can Texas rig your bait. The hook that you choose is going to be dependent on the scenario in which you're fishing. If I'm fishing in a situation where, I'm fishing around rocks and pilings, things like that, where I'm not really going to get hung up that often, go ahead, stick with the typical mushroom jig head. That's gonna work just fine. It's gonna get you bit, and it's probably gonna have a really decent hookup ratio. But if I'm fishing around a lot of weeds or heavy cover, I'm gonna wanna try and stay weedless to an extent. So maybe go with one that has a weed guard or that EWG, depending on the size of the soft plastic that you're using. So now that you guys know what hook you want to use, you got to pay attention to the size that you're going to use as far as weight goes. I'm talking 1/4 ounce, 1 ounce, 3/16, you know the deal. So you really want to pay attention to the weight that you're pairing with the certain scenario. So let's say I'm fishing like 3 to 5 foot of water. Maybe I'm going to want to go with a 1/16 ounce. That's going to allow me to be more finesse. I'm going to stay light when I pick up that rod tip. It's not just gonna slam into the bottom right away. Because if I pick up like a 1/2 ounce and throw that in shallow water, I'm gonna spend more time pounding the bottom, and that's not exactly gonna be enticing to the fish. And if you're in a finicky scenario where these fish really don't want to touch anything and they're going to eat the Ned rig, you don't want to be putting something in front of their face that's going to make the situation worse. So in most situations, when I'm fishing shallow water, I'm fishing a lighter Ned head. The only time that I'm fishing something heavier in like shallow water, for me personally, is like when I'm bed fishing. If I'm really trying to stir up the bottom, I throw a Ned rig into that bed and I really want that to be face down in their bed to really trigger a strike, that's when I'm gonna go into a little bit heavier Ned rig. But for the most part, shallow water, light Ned head. Now, when you guys wanna use a heavy Ned head, like I'm talking 1/4 ounce on up from there. Typically, I fish a heavier Ned rig whenever I'm fishing in open water or deep water. I fish Lake Erie and St. Clair a lot, so maybe I'm fishing a rock piling out in 15 foot of water. I'm gonna fish something heavier. The reason being is casting and fall rate. If I fish a 1/16 ounce sinker in the wind, that sucker is gonna get blown away and I'm probably never gonna get the accurate cast that I'm trying to get, as well as trying to reach the bottom. If I'm fishing in 15, 20 foot of water, I'm gonna be sitting there for a second for that, bait to sink down to the bottom. But along with that, you have current and that bait's probably just gonna drift all the way over to one side, or it's just not gonna stay put to where you're trying to go. So I'm always trying to fish that heavier Ned head in those situations. And lastly, the rod and line that you're gonna be pairing with the Ned rig is gonna make a big difference when it comes to hookup ratio. The rod setup that I am typically fishing with Ned rigs is going to be a 6'10" to a 7-foot medium or medium light action rod. Along with that, I'm gonna be fishing light line. Me personally, I typically run 15-pound braid with a 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon leader. Now, in some scenarios, I will move that leader up to about 10 to 12 pounds. It really depends where I'm fishing. These hooks, these mushroom heads, are not the thickest wire gauge hook. So if we had a really heavy duty setup, we're gonna run into issues. Issues like casting. It's gonna be very hard to cast a light bait on heavy line with a heavy duty rod setup. But not only that, if you guys have a heavier rod with heavier line, when you go to set that hook, you have the chances of potentially bending that hook out on that bait and losing that fish. Now, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it happens. Fishing a Ned rig is not something you want to be just hammering that hook into, right? You're gonna want to just pick that rod tip up, let the rod load up. That's why we're fishing with like a medium light. Let that rod handle that fish for you. You don't need to whip your rod up in the air. You just pick that rod up and slightly reel down on the fish, let that tension load. You're gonna get that hook set and you're gonna be gentle, which is gonna allow you to get more fish to the boat. So there you guys have it. There's a few simple techniques that you guys can go about fishing the Ned rig that's gonna make you a better fisherman. I promise, take these steps right here. They're very simple. Just put a little more mind into the Ned rig and you guys will be catching way more fish. So I hope this video helped you guys out. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down below. I'll try to get it answered for you. And if you guys love the content, do me a favor, consider hitting that subscribe button. We have a lot of great fishing content here on the channel. So if you like the videos, we're gonna keep them coming. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.